All right, episode 1 of Winning Time. The rise of the Lakers dynasty is over, and we're here to talk it through. I'm Jose Salviati, editor of the Peach Basket, and I'm happy to be joined, hopefully by Evan Moore, Akeem Evans, and Derek Lavell. I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves before we get into the show, but I'm going to go ahead and start. I got to say, Derek kind of gave birth to this, and in doing so, he said he wanted to have two folks on here who kind of lived through that time, and two that didn't, and I'm one of the ones that did. Watching the show was wild. I'll be honest, it was really wild. It was interesting. The rise of the Lakers coincided with me becoming a self-aware human being. So it was really perfect. I started to become aware and an athlete right when the Lakers got good. So watching this show tonight was wild for reasons we'll get into. But it was real exciting to me. And I'm excited to see what I knew and what I didn't know about the rise of the Lakers in the 80s. So that's me. Evan, I don't think is on yet. Hopefully he'll be with us later. But let's go ahead and jump to you, Akeem.
Yeah, so when it comes to the show, I guess the first thing I really didn't understand was that the NBA was possibly going to fold around that time. Like, I always thought once the NBA and ABA joined together, it was kind of smooth sailing from there, that was like the early 70s, right?
Yeah. If I remember right, yeah. So for you, this is history. This isn't anything you necessarily lived through, right?
Right. Like, I didn't really know much about Jerry Buss.
Right.
Because by the time I was watching basketball in the early 2000s as like a teenager, he was pretty old by then. I didn't really see interviews with him or anything. His kids had kind of taken over. So I didn't know anything about his personality. So I don't know do you feel like this is an accurate depiction of his personality?
Not only from what I know, on the outside looking in, and I went to the forum, a lot of times, to be real honest. I never got to see him live, but based on the interviews I saw with him and that sort of thing, yeah. Not only did that come through, right angles. Josh Bradley looked like him. You have to.
He does.
Kind of mess with your focus a little bit, right? But if you dim your focus a little bit, he did look a lot like him. Which was wild, really wild to me. And it helps a lot, I think, as they tell the story. All right, well, Derek, what brings you here? Why did you have an interest in this show?
So I feel like, as being part of the younger generation, I always thought that some of the things that we've always overlooked was we always think what's happening currently is what is the best. And for me, I always prided myself being a basketball historian. So being part of kind of the Shaq Kobe era and then being part of the Kobe generation,
right.
Obviously I always lean towards more like Kobe being the greatest Laker. But then, people of your generation will it wasn't dismissive, but it was just say like, you have no idea about the impact.
Right.
And sometimes I think that's where the disconnect happens. Like, I can sit up here and read the 5 titles. He went to 9 finals in 11 years. And then the impact about what Magic Johnson not just had on the Los Angeles Lakers, but on the game of basketball in the city of Los Angeles. Like Akeem said, I knew that the NBA in the 70s was on the verge of basically being dissolved because of drug problems, because of race problems, and because of financial problems. So that to me was kind of one of the things that stuck out, was that they were really trying to tell the audience who wasn't a part of this, telling them, hey, what you know now about basketball being the number 1 global game, that what you think the game is now was not what it was when Magic Johnson and Larry Bird came into the league in 1979. And to show throughout the episode the kind of disconnect of what Dr. Jerry Buss thought about Magic Johnson and what everyone else thought about Magic Johnson
Right.
I think was really eye-opening.
Yeah.
And, reading Jeff Pearlman's Showtime book, he highlights it, but to kind of, for everyone to visually see like the disconnect of what, looking back, we all thought like, oh, Magic Johnson, he went number one 1979. He's like one of the 5 greatest number one picks in the history of the game. He was a no-brainer. But then when you live in the moment in that time, you realize like, maybe to some of the public, but it was really a 50-50.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's dive into that a little bit. Let me take a little bit of a step back. So now that, we kind of know who we are, myself having lived through it, the other two gentlemen, and Derek has called them the younger generation, which I take offense to. We'll go with less experienced moving forward. But it's cool because you're going to get 2 different perspectives, which I think is awesome. But, like Derek mentioned, this HBO series is based on the best-selling book written by Jeff Pearlman, which I admit I hadn't read. And I think it might be good to read it for me personally. But I'm watching the show fresh. I did not read the book. The book called Showtime, Magic, Kareem, Riley, and the Los Angeles Lakers Dynasty of the 1980s. What we're going to do as we recap this show, for me, it's therapeutic, I think, to talk about it for honestly, and for you guys, it's a bit of a history lesson, which I think is super, super cool. We're going to start by kind of recapping episode 1, and then we're going to dive deep into some of the things that we've already talked about. So quick recap. This is just me kind of encapsulating episode 1. They started at the end where we saw Magic get his diagnosis, and the assumption was he's about to address the media, which I still remember that day. Was wild. Then they went back to the start, and they kind of coincided in parallel, the work that Dr. Buss had to go through to buy the team, and then the struggle that Magic had understanding if he belonged, which I thought was really an interesting parallel. That's an encapsulation of episode 1. So what we're going to do now is we're going to kind of dive deeper into, what we saw individually in episode 1. I'll go ahead and get started. I'll give you my thoughts. And then, I'm really curious to hear yours. So like I said, man, therapeutic. This was wild. Starting with that moment with Magic, was rough because, that was, such a big moment, not just for basketball fans, but for human beings. It was so raw and emotional. But then they took it back to the start. It was shocking to me what I didn't know. And again, it's kind of coincided with me just being a little kid and being aware of my surroundings. So I didn't remember, I didn't know really that the NBA was so close. And I wonder if it was over dramatized. But I know that the NBA wasn't particularly popular. But whether they were really close to, going under, I don't know. But watching the struggle that Dr. Buss had to go through, it was wild, kind of just playing the game and hoping he was able, to make it work, which obviously I don't think would happen today. Today you're vetted. Today every T is crossed, every I is dotted. You can't play those games. Today you can't be the swan, like Dr. Buss had said. It was wild to me to see that Jerry West, and I did have to fact check this, and comes to find out, it was true. Jerry West, who gets all the credit in the world for building dynasties everywhere he goes. He's the Midas guy. Whatever he touches turns to gold. He didn't want to draft Magic Johnson. That's wild to me. And I wrote this down, and I went and read it again, watched it again. He gave 3 reasons. Whether or not this is accurate or not, I don't know, but it makes a lot of sense. Point guards were not 6'9" then. And even today, that's a bit of a rarity. He said he's too tall. He's a turnover waiting to happen. It makes sense that he would think that. He's a showboat. He's flashy. Yes, I could see that. They thought the same of Pistol Pete Maravich, right? Who actually, was playing in the 70s. A lot of players, a lot of people didn't like that. And he smiles too much, is what he said. Jerry West said he's soft. He doesn't take this game seriously. This is a man's game. And man, that all rang so true. I could see that. Now, what I remember when Magic was drafted. And I'll never forget the very first game, and maybe they will do this in episode 2. The very first game was against the San Diego Clippers at the time. And there was a bunch of hoopla because, Magic was coming to town. And, he was a world champion, number 1 pick, the whole thing. And Kareem won that game in San Diego with a skyhook from the free throw line. And Magic Johnson, the 19-year-old rookie, hugged him like they had just won the championship. And I remember Kareem kind of looking at him like, we got 81 more of these to go. And it was a great moment. But that emotion, that raw emotion you saw, and that joy was infectious, man. And to think that Jerry West, who we revere, for a lot of different reasons, didn't want him, wanted Sidney Moncrief, who turned out to be a phenomenal player too. He certainly is not Magic Johnson, but Sidney was a solid player for the Bucks most of his career. It's wild to look at that. I did not know that. I took notes. I'm going through and see if anything else here. The Horn nightclub was a real thing, which is wild. I had to look that up. Jack Kent Cooke was a nasty dude. I didn't know that. I remember seeing pictures of him. He was older, and it kind of, it makes sense that he was like that. But that was wild. I loved the Bootsy Collins cameo. I loved seeing the Forum again. It's where I went to go watch him play more than once. The imagery of the coin flip, right? And the slow-mo, whether or not they found the coin underneath the cushion, I don't know. But I loved how they played that out. Because, who carries around? I don't have coins in my pocket. It was wild. And how it went slow-mo. And just think about how everything would change depending on where that coin landed. I thought was wild. And then that imagery of Dr. Boss and Jack Kent Cooke, playing chicken, right? Was wild. I mean, it was a very good show. It told a great story, I thought. And watching, Norm Nixon, this is what I'll leave you with. And then Akeem, we'll run to you. Norm Nixon was my favorite Lakers player. I think generally for me, and I think it's just the way I'm wired. If everybody loves something, I'm going to look for something else to love, which is why I'm kind of drawn a little more to the Clippers and the Lakers, because of the underdog thing. But growing up, I was absolutely a Lakers fan. Donald Sterling had a cameo too, which was icky. But Norm Nixon was my favorite player, in part because, he was a little bit of the underdog, but also because he told a story one time. He had a phenomenal jump shot, a fadeaway jump shot. He was 6'1". He was not a particularly tall guy, but he had an unblockable fadeaway jump shot at 6'1". And he had an interview one time, and I heard him tell a story that he learned it playing against a guy who would consistently, rough him up defensively. And his name, and I don't even know if this is true. I'd love to reach out to Norm and find out. But he said his name was Jose Champagne, this player. And first off, I never heard anybody named Jose that was a baller, so I connected there. And Jose Champagne is just kind of a cool name, And Norm Nixon gave all the credit to his jump shot to this guy named Jose Champagne. So Nixon was my favorite player. I think his number 10 should be hanging in the rafters, incidentally. And to watch that, Jerry West didn't want Magic, Norm Nixon didn't want Magic, although that makes sense because he was the point guard. That was rough for me. I had a hard time watching those scenes. And incidentally, the guy who plays Norm Nixon is Norm Nixon's son, which I think is kind of cool. So that's it, man. Those are my raw emotions. Like I said, I took some notes. I'll see if I missed anything, but those are the big ones that stood out to me. Overall, man, I really, really enjoyed the show. Akeem, what were your thoughts?
I thought the beginning was really interesting because, going in, I expect this is a show about the start of the Lakers dynasty, but they started by showing you a glimpse of the end of the Lakers dynasty, of their first initial dynasty. So I thought that was a really interesting way to start the show. And then the second thing was just kind of learning all of these characters' personalities, like Dr. Buss. I really enjoyed that character. John C. Reilly is killing it so far. But then with Jerry West, I feel like that character is a little bit exaggerated because I've read his biography, and he's, he has a history of anxiety and depression. But he never made it seem like he was that angry of a character. So I don't know how accurate that is. So I'd like to dig more into that.
And were you saying Jerry West specifically?
Yeah, Jerry West.
Yeah. He was angry. He came across as a bad dude. Yeah.
He's throwing his MVP trophy through through a window and everything. Like,
Right.
it's probably a little bit hyperbolic if I had to guess.
Right. Yeah.
And then I was surprised because to me, I always thought Magic Johnson was like a clear-cut number one. I mean, he just beat Larry Bird in the NCAA championship the year before, and Larry Bird was instantly like a top 20 player in the NBA his rookie year. So I can't imagine that anyone would look at Magic Johnson and Sidney Moncrief and think that they should take Sidney Moncrief. And I know he had a pretty decent career with the Bucks, like a few 20+ point per game years and everything, but it's Magic Johnson.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah, and I love how they fleshed that out, right? Because Jerry West, again, I think these points make sense. You didn't have a 6'9" point guard back then. You just didn't. And I can see where, it would be easy to think that's a turnover waiting to happen. And he's too flashy. Again, that makes sense. And he doesn't take the game seriously. They say the same thing about Dwight Howard right now. So I could see that. So it stood to reason. And I think also, Jerry West pointed out that Moncrief averaged more points than Magic did. So yeah, I could see it now, knowing what we know about Magic. It doesn't make any sense, but I think at the time, yeah. But yeah, him throwing that MVP trophy out the window was crazy. The only guy who ever won the Finals MVP in a losing for the losing team too. I get I can imagine that would have been hard.
And so, from your perspective in the '80s, who would you say was the leader of that team? Was it Magic or Kareem?
Kareem was the best player. I don't think there's any doubt back then. But it's such a good question because the whole era, I think of whose team is it, right? The alpha thing, the thing that broke up the Kobe and Shaq era that Derek brought up. I don't think necessarily existed so much back then. At least not that I could kind of conceive of or think about. Kareem was the best player. So in that sense, it was Kareem's team. But Kareem wasn't necessarily a leader. I think the way they depicted him was perfect.
Mm-hmm.
They did that whole airplane thing, which is the funniest movie I ever seen. And then the kid comes up to him after he's done shit, and he just brushes him off. I could see Kareem doing that, and listening to music and not wanting to be bothered. That was Kareem. I mean, that was the persona that he kind of was. And I did get a chance, to see Kareem once at the Forum, and he just seemed really, standoffish, So I don't see him necessarily as a leader, but he was the best player, undeniably. I think the guys that were probably the more vocal ones was someone like Norm Nixon, Jamal Wilkes. But yeah, there wasn't one guy, before Magic came along.
Because when you talked about that moment of the first game where Magic hugs Kareem after the game, it kind of got me thinking like Magic has a very specific style of leadership that's a little more like positive, and he's got the smile on his face. Whereas I feel like sports media now kind of acts like if you don't have the same leadership style as like Jordan and Kobe, then you're not a good leader. But I think Magic kind of shows like a different way to do it. And I think like LeBron is a closer leadership style to Magic than to Jordan.
I agree. And Magic grew into that, right? There's no doubt about it. I'll never forget and I don't know when it happened, second, third year, people would go to the Forum and there would be, nobody would cheer. People would be on their phones. People would show up late. People would leave early. And Magic came out and he just chastised the crowd, right? Which would be something great if they depicted in this series. And that's when personally, when I thought, okay, this guy's taking ownership of this team, right? In the sense of being a leader, he called out the fans and said, you got to come out and cheer for us, right? We're giving it our all. You got to cheer for us. And honestly, the minute he did that, everything changed. And now all of a sudden the Lakers had a home court advantage. And that was why he said it, right? The Lakers didn't have home court advantage. And he wanted to. And he got to that point where he led that team that way in a lot of different ways. But yeah, it was different than the way MJ led or Kobe led. But it worked. It worked. All right, Derek, what do you got, man? What did you pick up that maybe Akeem and I missed?
Honestly, what's so tough about when these shows are being made is being able to transport the audience, right? Because this is based on in the 80s. And so when the opening scene happened and you see the first shot you see is a kid playing Game Boy, you immediately know this is the 90s. And then if you're a real like hardcore sports fan, you know, oh my God, they're starting from the end. And then it pans out to Magic, no goatee. And think about what he's looking at. He's looking at the guy who the history is going to precede him as a better basketball player than him. And you can see it in his face. He's like, I used to be that. I used to be on the cover smiling with my wife, Cookie. And I used to be the face of the league. And now I'm sitting in the car with my agent and he's bursting up in tears because he thinks I'm going to die in 2 months. Like in a 12-year time span, Magic went from on top of the world to rock bottom. Now, obviously, we all know how it ends and he, survives and he's still living a healthy life. But I thought Adam McKay did a really smart job directing this episode by saying, we're going to transport the audience. We're going to transport the viewer into 1990, early 90s. And then more specifically, after that scene, you show Dr. Jerry Buss talking about the NBA, and he's talking about the NBA and sex with his wife, and you're getting the understanding of this is the 70s. Like you're getting the 70s, and everything after that about the racial tension, about how even Dr. Jerry Buss even admitted how the league that the reason why ratings are down was that the league was too black, and that white viewers were turned off about how dark and how many black players were dominating the NBA. And some of the things when you read into it, I know the Courtship of Rivals documentary and book based on Magic and Bird, they go into how a lot of white audience members didn't like the fact that they thought the black players were just way too showboaty, that they were flashy. And ironically enough, the player that would come from the 80s as the most beloved and famous was probably the most flashy of them all in Magic Johnson.
No doubt.
And so I really thought like that really right there to be able to transport me into 91 and then in the late 70s, it felt like even when you watch it and you watch the way the picture looked, it's not in HD. You can't I can see Akeem clear. I can see you clear. You can see me clear. I go, when you watch the episode, it's a little fuzzy. You see, it's a little, you look like if you watch an old game right now, you're like, oh wow, that looks right. That looks right. It looks like if no one told you this was made in 2022, you'd be like, this looks like it was made in the early 80s.
Yeah.
And so that, and then the character I really stood out was the exaggeration of Jerry West, because as Akeem touched on earlier, was that he had a lot of demons. Now, all those demons came from an abusive father and a really difficult childhood coming up in West Virginia. But Jerry West was kind of Billy Bean before Billy Bean. Like Jerry West does not watch a basketball game. Like for every single basketball game he's ever was the general manager for, he has never watched. He's never watched the championship. The Lakers win the title. he's usually driving around on the 405 because he can't deal with the anxiety coming from losing in the finals all those years.
Right.
So he can't deal, and he has like some self-control issues. That's what made him such a great basketball player. That's why, he, even though a guy he's 1-10 in the NBA finals, he's deemed one of the clutchest players in NBA history, was because every time he had the ball in his hands, he always was able to make a play. It just so happens the other team always had the ball before him. And so my thing is that to be able to show the depiction of the exaggeration of what he felt internally. I think the cursing and the outburst was all internal, but you can't read a facial expression.
Yeah.
So they have to take what he felt internally and bring it out of him.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that was hard to watch, right?
Yeah.
Especially going to Clippers games recently, and you'll see Jerry West, and you just never, there was a line, and I'm not going to get it right, but the Dr. Bus character said, he is an ambassador for the game and a well-loved player for those that don't know him.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, wow, because there are people like that, that
Mm-hmm.
have a public persona and kind of a private persona. And I never thought that Jerry West was that person. Let's jump to episode 2. What do you, and I kind of touched on some of this stuff already. I think, what do you want to see? What do you hope to see? I think my guess is that episode 2 is going to be kind of the integration of Magic now. And Dr. Buss into running the team and playing on the team. It would be great to see, if not in episode 2, in episode 3, that game against the Clippers where Magic hugs Kareem. That was a great moment, something I still remember to this day. So, that's my hope. What do you see, Akeem, coming in episode 2?
Well, I think we'll meet Pat Riley.
Right. Yeah.
As the coach, and we'll see how Kareem and Magic's relationship develops.
Yeah.
I think that's probably what the whole episode will be centered around, is those two, and then bringing in the new characters, the coach, assistant coaches, and also focusing on Jerry Buss's vision for the team as far as it being a real show. Yeah. Just like in the rest of Hollywood, everything's a show there. So I think that's what it'll be about.
Yeah. Derek, what do you foresee?
So I'm going to also touch on what Akeem said, but for me, it's not Pat Riley. It's Paul Westhead, because Paul Westhead is the coach that everyone forgets about.
Yeah.
Because he's the one that was the head coach of the team that won the title. But what fascinates me is, does the dynamic between Magic and Paul Westhead, was it always fractured? Did it start off with a little friction, or was that material, or over a course of time?
Yeah.
That's when Magic was just like, no, I can't have him, and let's take Pat Riley from the broadcasting booth and let's make him the head coach.
Which is what happened.
I know. It's like, if it would be like if the Golden State Warriors, after this amazing run, after winning the title, was just like, hey, Jeff Van Gundy, why don't you be the head coach of our team? And people would just be like, that's insane. Yeah. Steve Kerr just won you a title, but that's what happened. And after 1980. And so I want to see that dynamic.
Yeah.
I want to see the dynamic of Paul Westhead, Pat Riley, Magic Johnson, and Dr. Jerry Buss, because I feel like we're all going to focus on the relationship between Kareem and Magic, but to me, what it seems what they did with the character of Jerry West, they're going to over dramatize everybody. Then I want to see that relationship of Paul Westhead, Pat Riley, Magic, and Dr. Jerry Buss, because Jose, you lived through this. It's inconceivable to think about the coach that won you the title gets fired because the star player who is beloved says, I'm out on this guy.
Yeah. I hope it's got to be covered, of course,
Yeah.
and I'll save this for that episode. But I will tell you, there was a lot of news about why that happened, and I mean, some very specific stuff that I don't think I was, everybody knew about it back then, but you guys might not. So I'm very curious to hear how it plays out, what's fact and what's fiction. But I will tell you, when that episode airs, right, what the story was, why they wanted Riley, why Norm Nixon was traded, which might be a little bit of a spoiler alert, and why why Paul was ultimately ousted, and that was amazing. Wow, a little off script, but I do want to thank Isaac and Jason. I don't know if you guys are still watching, but you left some comments. We appreciate it. I'm going to go ahead and just put out one. And Akeem, Derek, we said we would talk this through, but this is a bit of a pat ourselves on the back. Isaac is saying, great job. Thanks for putting this together. We're grateful. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And I will say, if you happen to be watching us on Facebook, we're happy to take comments, questions. We'd love to get your thoughts as well. We're going to do this for every episode. This is a fictionalized version of events, but we're basketball fans. That's why we're here. So we're going to kind of treat it a little bit like a competition, and we're going to ask our panel who won this episode, and what we mean by won is totally up to you. So Akeem, you first. Who do you think won this episode?
I would say Dr. Buzz, because he's really the one driving the story, and he provided most of the comedy in this episode and kind of set like the rhythm and pace for the series here. And it's kind of interesting because the show really feels it's like riding this line between spoof and reality.
Right.
Like there's obviously a lot of exaggeration, but I enjoy it so far. And but yeah, I'll go with Dr. Bus.
Right on. Derek, who's your winner?
I'm gonna go with Magic, the actor that plays Magic Johnson, because when this was rumored, the first thing, and I'm sure for everybody listening, the first thing you think of is like, who's going to play Magic, who's going to play Kareem, because it's very hard to find human beings 6'9" and 7'2", and so let alone can they act, and let alone can they actually play basketball like these guys. So the fact that when we meet Magic and he's coming down the stairs, and you get both sides, you get Magic when he's talking about Dad, that's my name, don't wear it out. And then he turns to Irvin when he talks to his mother, and he looks to the camera, breaking the fourth wall, and says she can make Jesus fall off the cross.
Yeah, that was awesome.
You get, but when you watch it, you just go, oh my God, this is like magic. This is what it would have felt like to be in the house with Magic Johnson as he's becoming the guy the world's gonna know. And you get all these different layers of this character. You get the ending as we touched on, when the story opens. Then we're getting the young, vibrant, energetic Magic. Then we get the Magic who has a heart-to-heart to cook with Cookie, who we all know ends up being his wife, and he's trying to tell her, like, listen, I'm going out to LA, but nothing's going to change. I want you to come out. And she turns him down. And so you get that. So you get different layers, where as for Dr. Jerry Buzz, it's just him, right? We don't get the different waves of emotions as we did with Magic. So that's why I think Magic, to me, was the clear-cut winner of this episode.
I love both of them. I thought an extra credit, because from the right angle, they looked like I could see Magic. It was wild.
They got the signature smile.
Yeah,
100%.
The goatee is
100%. And from the right angle, I mean, it really looked like him. But I'm going to go a little off book here. I really liked the character that I had not known before, was just introduced to, Claire Rothman, the general manager of the Forum. who was the woman who had to stand up to kind of an abusive boss in Jack Kent Cooke, who I don't know if she played this game where she went to Dr. Buss and said, told him something about Jack Kent Cooke's going to want the money up front. You can't do it. Why are you telling me? He's your boss. He goes, I think I want you to be my boss, and to see a strong woman in that position in that era, I thought was really cool. And that's somebody I didn't know. I didn't know existed. Obviously this was a behind the scenes player, but I thought it was really cool. And the actress who played her just played her with the right amount of strength. I thought it was kind of a cool thing because this is somebody brand new to me. But to say that, Magic and the Dr. Buss characters were amazing. But I'm gonna give the W to Claire Rothman.
I also want to add, she had a very small scene, but obviously we know she's going to be a huge figurehead because of what she accomplished. Jeannie Buss in that scene was like a sixth man. She was coming in just shooting threes because she came in, and to think about that dynamic, that relationship, and even Dr. Buss kind of pushing back on her about how you want me to tell your mother that you're going to drop out of school and you're going to come work for me. And then for her to get every single question right, including the trip up question, right? The trip up question when he asked her, okay, who do I take? If we get the first pick, who do I take? And then she's like, well, it's easy. It's between the two guys just played for the national championship, Larry Bird and Magic Johnson. And he's waiting for her to slip up. And she's like, it's a trick question because Larry's going to the Boston Celtics. And so you get that, you see the passion, you see the love for the game from Jeannie, even though it was a small scene. To me, that was really impressive about whoever that actress was, really trying to encapsulate the soon-to-be owner of the Los Angeles Lakers.
Yeah, it's so cool watching this when we know, what's ahead for this team, for this player, but you still are so involved, which is amazing. Well, that's episode 1. We've been waiting for months for this to drop. We've been waiting to talk about the Lakers from the 80s because the Lakers in the 2020s are giving us a rough time, at least in 2022. So this was fun, exciting. We're going to be here every week. We're going to follow the same format. We're going to talk about every episode through to episode 10. Once again, we're all associated with a site called The Peach Basket, thepeachbasket.net. You can find all you need to know about us there. We are grateful. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. We'll be back next week to talk episode 2. Thank you.
The voice of the fan. Drop a bounce pass, throw down the rim rocker. Lay up off the glass right past the shot blocker. I follow through like Kobe's is money. You can cash it. For news on LA hoops, come over to Peach Basket. Up-to-date sports, post-game reports, debates and play-by-play coming straight off the court. The voice of the fan making noise, causing havoc. Zone a man up, you can ask Peach Basket. The Peach Basket, coming tune on there. The Peach Basket, where the news begins. We're dropping news like we're in the stands. Creative views from the average fan.